Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Mina. In this video, you're going to learn how to draft a pattern for this beautiful dress. If this looks like what you're interested in, please stick around. Let's dive straight into the video. So here's the paper I'll be using. I came down by 1 inch. This 1 inch line is going to serve as my starting line and also going to serve as my shoulder line. So I also divided this paper into two. The part I'm writing on right now is going to be for the front, while this other side will be for the back. Okay, so I'll go ahead with the drafting for the front first. So from the starting line, which is also my shoulder line, I will come down by 8 inches and mark. The 8 inches is for my chest line, that's including my shoulder slope. So from the shoulder line, I'll come down by 10.5 for my bust point. My bust point is 10.5. See, from the shoulder line, I'll come down by 14.5 for my under bust and 17 inches for my waistline. Then I'll go ahead and roll the lines across with my stretch ruler. That's my waistline. I'll also roll the line on my under bust as shown. Then I'll roll a line on my bust point, which is 10.5, and also on the chest line. Then I'll go ahead and label the lines. Then I'll use my marker pen to make the lines more visible. From the center front, I'll come in by 3 inches for my neck width, and I'll go down by 3 inches as well for the neck depth. Then I'll use my curve ruler to connect the dotted points together as shown. The next step is to take my shoulder measurement. From the center front, I'll come in by 7 inches. My shoulder is 14, divided by 2 is 7. I'll also mark the same thing on the chest line. From that point of 7 inches, I'll come down by 1.5 for my shoulder slope. Like from where I mark my 7 inches, I'll place my tape there, then I'll come down by 1.5 for my shoulder slope. I'll connect it back to the neck width as shown. I will also connect from the shoulder tip to the chest line. The next step is to measure what I have for my shoulder. Then I'll fold my tape into two as shown to determine the midpoint. I'll go ahead and mark the midpoint. From the midpoint, I'll go in by ½ inch. Then I'll use my straight ruler to connect from the ½ inch to my shoulder tip as shown. The next step is to place my tape on the chest line to mark my bust circumference. So from the center front, I'll come in by 8.5. Then I'll go in with my curve ruler to connect from the midpoint to my bust circumference, which is 8.5. The next step is to take my bust span measurements on the bust point. My bust span is 4, that is 8 divided by 2, I have 4. So I'll go ahead and mark the 4 there. On my under bust line, I'll mark the 4 inches as well. Then I'll also repeat the same thing on the waistline. Now I'll use a straight ruler to connect the dotted lines together. By using that line as a guide, I'll mark 1 inch on this side. I'll also repeat the same thing on the other side. You can see 1 inch and the other side 1 inch as well. On the waistline, I will do the same thing. The next step is to use my straight ruler to connect the dotted lines together from the under bust to the waistline. The next step is to determine the midpoint of my shoulder. So I'll measure it as shown. I'll go ahead and fold my tape into two. Then I'll mark what I have. From that midpoint, I'll use my French curve to connect it to the bust point. So pay attention to how I place my ruler. You have to make sure your ruler is sitting directly on the bust point and also on the midpoints of your shoulder. You can see, right? So I've gone ahead to connect it together. The next step is to come down by 1.5 inch. You can also decide to come down by 2 inches if you want the curve to be so pronounced. Okay, so I'll go ahead and connect from the bust points to the 1.5 inch that I came down by. So the next step is to also extend that line by 1.5 inch. So if you're coming down by 2 inches, make sure you're also extending the line by 2 inches. Since I came down by 1.5 inch, I had to extend the line by 1.5 inch. So the next step is to connect from the bust points to the under bust. You can see I'm using the straight parts of my ruler. Then for this other part, I'll use the curvy part. When you are doing this, make sure your ruler touches the under bust line and also the second line you just drew. You can see how I place my ruler, right? From that under bust to the second line as shown. So if it doesn't touch your bust points, don't bother because you still replace it. Is to take my bust circumference on the chest line, and I'm also going to replace what I have there. So what I have there is like half inch. I'll bring it to the side. So make sure you replace what you have so you now have shortage. On the waistline, I'll go ahead and take my waist circumference. Mine is 6.5. I'll mark it. Then I'll replace what I have here. This dart intake that I took, I'll replace it. I have 2 inches. I'll go ahead and take my 2 inches there. So I'll connect it to the bust points. The next step is to connect from the 1.5 extension back to the bust point. So this is going to serve as a new armhole curve. You have to replot this point so you don't have issue when you're trying to join the center front and the side fronts together. The next step is to drive the back. I have to drive the back first before I finish up with the front. So I'll make the block that demarcates the front and the back more visible. So from this starting line, I also came down by 1 inch for my back. From the starting line, I'll come down by 8 inches for my chest line. My chest line, including the shoulder slope, is 8 inches. So from the shoulder line, I also come down by 15 inches for my waistline. So my back half length is shorter than the front half length. The reason is because in front I have boobs, right, but at the back I do not have boobs, so that's why the back is shorter than the front. So the difference between my front half length and my back half length is 2 inches. So to get this measurement right, what you have to do is to tie a rope or a tape around your natural waist. So go ahead and measure from your shoulder down to where the tape stops for the front, and also repeat the same thing for the back. So I've gone ahead to rule a line across for the waistline, and what I'm ruling right now is for my chest line. I'll go ahead and label it. You can see for the back we did not input our bust point and our under bust. That is because we do not have boobs at the back. The next step is to take my neck width and my neck depth. For my neck depth, I'm going to use 1 inch, but for the neck width, I'm still going to maintain the same 3 inches I used for the front. I'll go ahead and connect it together as shown. The next step is to take my shoulder measurement from the center back. I'll come in by 7 inches and mark. From that point of 7 inches, I'll come down by 1.5 as well. The same thing I used for the front is what I'm using for the back. Then I'll go ahead and connect it to the neck width as shown. I'll also take the same thing on my chest line. That is my shoulder measurement. I'll input it on the chest line. I'll use my stretch ruler to connect it to the shoulder tip. The next step is to measure what I have from the shoulder down to the chest line. So I'll go ahead and fold my tape into 2 to determine the midpoint. From the midpoint, I'll go in by ½ inch and mark. Then I'll use my ruler to connect from the midpoints to the shoulder tip. From my center back, I'll come in by 8.5 for my bust circumference. Then I'll add 0.25 to it. Then I'll use my curve ruler to connect from the midpoint to my bust circumference. From the center back, I'll come in by 4 inches for my dart. I'll mark the same thing on the chest line, 4 inches. Then I'll use a stretch ruler to connect them together. I'll be using 1.5 inch for my dart, so I'll go ahead and fold 1.5 inch into 2 to get the midpoint. So from that midpoint, I'll mark what I have on this other line. I'll repeat the same thing on the other side. I'll use my stretch ruler to connect it to the chest line. I'll go ahead and slash this paper into 2 so I can show you something. The length of the back is 15 inches. From the shoulder, I have 15. Then for the front, I have 17. You can see they are not equal. So the difference is 2 inches. That 2 inches, I'm going to bring it to the front. That 2 inches is going to serve as my side dart. Then I'll connect it to the bust point as shown. So when you measure from your shoulder to your waistline for the front and the back, whatever you have as the difference between the back and the front, bring it to the front and use it as your side dart. By using what you have as your side dart, it's going to make the front and the back align. I'll go ahead and shade the parts I'll be cutting out. This bust dart, we are going to close this part. So I'll have to replot the neckline for the front. Is a V neckline. So I'll come down by 6 inches and mark from the shoulder. I'll come down by 6 inches. Then I'll use my stretch ruler to connect from the neck width. From that point, you can see how I place my ruler. I'll connect it like so to meet with the 6 inches. Then I'll go ahead and cut the front out. Pay attention to how I'm cutting it. The next step is to close my bust dart. So pay attention to how I'm going to close it. You can see how I folded the paper from the down part. Look at how I've folded it. Then I'll bring it from this down part. I'll bring it to meet with the bust line. You can see, right? Then I'll use my tape to tape it down. Then after taping it down, make sure that part is not pointy. The part I'm working on right now, make sure it's not pointy. So after closing the bust dart, you can see that part is no more equal. So what you have to do is to use a stretch ruler to reconnect it back together, like to blend that part, or you can use a tracing wheel. Try to trace that part before you cut it out. So whichever method that works for you, you can go ahead and use it. So make sure you blend that part before you cut it out. Then I'll go ahead and cut it out. I'll also trace out the center front. You can see how I'm cutting it. We are done with the front. The next step is to finish up the back so we can cut it out. So from the center back, I'll come in by 8.5, which is my bust measurement, and I also add 0.25 to it. On the waistline, I will take my waist measurement, which is 6.5, and I also replace the dart of 1.5 that I took. You can see I'll replace it at this point. I will replace the dart intake. Then I'll use my stretch ruler to connect from the bust point to the waistline. To eliminate my zipper bulge, I'll come in by 0.5 from the center bag. Then I'll connect it as shown to the upper part. Then I'll use my marker pen to connect the neckline to make it more visible. Then the next step is to cut it out. So I'll go ahead and label this bag, and this is the center front and this other part is the side front. So we are done with the upper part. The next step is to cut the skirt part. So this is the paper I'll be using for the skirt part. I've gone ahead to draw a starting line. From the starting line, I came down by 9 inches. The 9 inches is for my hip line. That's my hip line. So the next thing I'm going to do is to subtract my upper part. You know, the upper part is 17 inches. So that's my waistline. From the upper part, I'll place my 17 inches on the waistline. Then I'll go ahead and mark the full length of my gown. So the full length here is, I measured 40 inches here, but I later reduced it to 39, to 38 rather, because it was looking too long for me. So I'll go ahead and input all my measurements. On the waistline, I'll take my waist circumference, which is 6.5. On the hip line, I'll take my hip circumference, which is 9 inches. And on the full length, I'll mark 9 inches. I'll subtract 1.5 to make it curvy. Then I'll use my stretch ruler to connect the down from the full length to the hip line. And from the hip line to the waistline, I'll use the curvy part of my ruler to connect it as shown. Then I'll go ahead and cut it out. So next step is to draft the back pattern. So I came down by 1 inch for my starting line, and for my zipper allowance, I left like 3 inches there. So the starting line is also serving as my waistline. From the waistline, I'll come down by 9 inches for that's for my hip line. Then I'll use my stretch ruler to mark the line across as shown. I'll go ahead and label my waistline, my hip line, and I'll subtract my half length to take the full length. I'll go ahead and mark it. The next step is to input my dart. On the waistline, I'll take 4 inches for my dart, then I'll come down by 5.5. I'll use my straight ruler to connect it as shown. I'll take half inch on both sides, then I'll connect it to the dart leg. On the waistline, I'll take my waist circumference, which is 6.5, and also repeat the dart of 1 inch. On the hip line, I'll take my hip circumference, which is 9. I'll bring down my hip circumference to the full length. I have 9. I'll go ahead and mark the 9. Then I'll go in by 1.5 so I can have that part curvy. I'll connect it from the hip length to the full length. I will use my curve ruler to connect from the hip line to the waistline as shown. Then this part is for my zipper. So guys, I'm so sorry, I didn't know this part wasn't recording, so I'll explain what I did here. So I mark 1 inch straight for my zipper allowance, but around this butt area I mark 1.5 just to make my butt to be free. Okay, so this is the end of this video. In our next video, you are going to cut it on the fabric and we are going to join everything together. So thank you so much for watching to this point. See you guys in my next video. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. Bye guys.